Hello there, my lovely lovelies, and welcome to this haQ attaQ Docutorial. Now, I don't know about you, but I always lose my shit whenever JimAudio puts out something new. Ever since he put out Poison 202, I've just known that we're working with someone here that basically cares a lot about what they're doing. They haven't released a lot of apps on the App Store. There's 4 of them, but there's so much work that has gone into them. So much detail with everything from graphics to UI to the sounds, and the sounds are always inspired by music from the 90s. Now, whether you're already a follower of Jim's work or if you're not, stick around because you'll be hearing from Jim himself. Yeah, I was able to score an interview with Jim in where he speaks English for the first time in history in an interview right here in this docutorial. And I'm super happy to be able to present you with it.
My name is Dmitry, and I am the developer of Grooverider 2 and all of the JimAudio apps on the App Store. I've been working on GR2 for about 3 years. I was switching between programming and music writing, so I did my work with the Grooverider 2. But then I switched to the music and I was totally forgetting about anything related to GR2. From one point, it's some kind of relief when you did such a big amount of work and it finally got into the App Store. People started to send me their feedback about it, and I started to understand what it means to the other people. Because I had one friend who was cooperating with me, he just was my tester and advisor. From our point of view, this app was very inspiring, but we needed feedback from the other people. And now I can finally see what's happening. I read in the forums, I read in the mails, the requests that users send me. So that's a relief from the one point. And from the second point, they're requesting so many crazy things sometimes. I just note them all. Maybe somewhere I will find a time to implement it.
Alright, so I want to pull up some GR2 highlights. And for those of you who already own Grooverider 16, if there is anything that you can take away from this video, apart from this splash screen here showing you some of the differences, well, it is the fact that Grooverider 2 is the next gen Grooverider. It is very powerful. It has been so upgraded compared to its predecessor. And if you want to upgrade your Grooverider game, you really should go get Grooverider 2. There is a lot of new stuff inside Grooverider 2, like a souped-up, Poison-inspired synthesizer. This thing is a hell of a lot of fun to work with, so powerful and sounds absolutely great. But there's another synthesizer in here because you've got a wavetable synthesizer, and this thing can actually load serum files. The sampler section inside Grooverider has gotten such an upgrade with great time stretching algorithms, and this goes for both the main sampler and the new proper drum sampler for building drum kits. On top of that, there is a sound font player in here, which is mental in 2025. And it just keeps going because we can also load our most favorite AUV3 plugin instruments into our parts. And there's something extra here because Jim has optimized the code in his older plugins like Pure Acid and Poison 202. So if you're a previous owner, instead of loading them as AUV3s, you could load them as these more slimmed down optimized versions. And that will give you more power over to everything else you want to do in your project. Pretty sweet, right? But there's more because each part can have up to 3 layers and all of the sounds can be processed with a whole lot of effects in the effects bus where you have up to 3 slots that you can load. And there's also a proper equalizer in here. So there are a lot of instruments and sounds in here, but you do need proper tools in order to use those sounds to build loops, tracks, beats, or whatever you might be making. And there are. You got a proper piano roll with made-for-touch editing controls. And this is something I really appreciate, being someone who spends all of my creative time with an iDevice. Now, on top of that, there is now a clip launch interface, and the clips have clip modifiers as an option. I'll show you more about that later on. Best of all is that whatever patterns, loops, or clips you're making in here, you can put them together into a track or a song in the song arranger. And if you're building songs or tracks, you're gonna need good mixing, and there is in here. The mixer works with an internal bitrate of 32-bit float for the highest sound quality. Now, if we look at the mixer, we can see that there are 16 channels and a main 2 bus. And so the 16 channels are, of course, one channel for each part, because there's 16 parts in here. Now, at the top of them, we can see that there are also 2 send effects, and each send effect can have up to 3 effect plugins in them. Now, the cool thing here is that if you happen to have a favorite AUV3 effect plugin like distortion or compressor or an equalizer, maybe even a reverb, then you can load those at this stage. And after everything gets sent through the main 2 bus, it all hits a limiter that sounds great, even when you push it to the max. Now, when I did my second interview with Jim, yes, the second interview, and if you were joined up on our Discord, link in description, you would know why I had to do a second interview and why the first one failed. Now, here's the thing. In our second interview, Grooverider 2 had already been out in the wild for at least a week, and Jim had already started receiving feedback. So I asked him if there was any good feedback, if there were any good feature requests, and also what he had to say about the fact that some people felt left out because Grooverider 2 only works on iDevices running iOS 16 and up. And this is what he said.
Some things really make sense. Some people really proposing some very usable things that I didn't think about when I was designing. From the other side, they report me about the bugs. In the first place, I try to remove all the bugs, so it's not to break the user impression of the app, so it must be perfect. The priority for me currently is to provide all the general protocols like MIDI, supporting MIDI controllers, importing MIDI files, so many stuff that I will have to put into Grooverider. So I'm kind of still developing it. From the beginning, I wanted to do a minimal supported version about 14, maybe 15 iOS, but I had to do it for the 16 because some functions appeared that allow to process sound in 64 bits format, so-called accelerating frameworks. Previously, I was writing these algorithms in C++, and now when rendering the samples, I rely on these accelerated functions because they are really fast and really help to lower the CPU load. So iOS 16 is the minimal required version.
Now we're going to go up to the top and we're going to start in the middle where we have our pattern browser. There's a bunch of really straightforward basic stuff here, like being able to set up our tempo and our measure. Now, we can also set up our swing, our root key, and the scale, and also chord set for the different types of keyboards we have inside Grooverider 2. The dopest thing I want to show you, though, is when you are switching from one pattern to another. Now, in order to demonstrate what I mean, we need to have a pattern playing. We're going to go back into the browser and select another pattern and press load. As soon as we do that, we have 2 options, either start or mix A to B. The start one will just count down the currently playing pattern before it just switches over to the next one. If we select mix A to B, we get a DJ style interface. And this is so useful for when you're doing jams or live performing.
Stop it. Get some help.
We're going to stay at the top, but we're going to head to the left next, where we have the transport controls like play, stop, and record. The button next to the transport controls opens up the Grooverider 2 internal file browser. Now, this user folder can actually be accessed through the Files app, where you go to Grooverider 2 and then you go to the user folder, and in here you'll be able to import your own sample files and your own wavetable files and also sound phones. But what you don't see here right now are the layer presets, part presets, Drumrack presets folder, and I'm hoping that Jim will give us access to these in the future too. I have some preset packs I would love to make. Now, heading back up again, if you end up doing any doo-dooing inside Grooverider 2, we do have an undo and a redo. And these are without a doubt my most favorite doo-doos. Now, if we stay at the top and we look at the right side of the app, we have all of those important tabs we need to know about. In the sound tab, we can find all of the controls pertaining to sound. So here's where we want to be when we want to edit all of our layers or our synthesizers, drum machines, adding effects for them, equalizing them. In the Clips tab, we find our clips. Here we make clips, delete clips, move clips around, add modifiers for clips, and each part can have up to 16 clips, and we can scroll through the list like this. The Edit tab is where you do all of your note editing. You've got one for melodic content, which is the regular piano roll, and then you've got one for drumming content, which will resemble a step sequencer. However, if you are a jungle drum and bass head like myself and you want to do melodic kick, bass kick, stuff like this, well, you can. Next up, we have the Songs tab, and here we can actually start using all of that clip stuff we've been making into building a track. We're jumping over one tab real quick here to go to the Mixer tab, where we can see an overview of all of our parts or all of our channels. Now we have our volume controls, we got solo mute, a proper equalizer in here, panning controls up here, and then we have two send effect channels. Now, if we go to effect buses, here is where we set them up. So we got FX-A and B return. Now, both of them have up to 3 slots for effects, and what's dope here is that we can actually load AUV3 effects in here. Next to the FX return, we can see the master effects, and the master effects is something that you can apply that goes on to whatever goes through the main 2 bus. We have a bunch of effects that we can use, and when it comes to delays or modulation effects, they're all BPM synced, as it should be in a Groovebox app. By the way, the master effects can actually be accessed if you're in the sound tab, for instance. If we press here and hide this down, we can see those pads and interact with them to test our mixes out as we're working with our track. Now, lastly, we have the master bus effect slots, and here we can have up to 3. We can load AUV3 effects. So if you have any saturation plugins or compressor favorites, yeah, I think you get it. Whenever I have a developer on the line, I always pick their brains about what they're most happy with, what they're least happy with, some struggles they've come across that have been really difficult, things like that. And I asked Jim about those things, and this is what he said.
The biggest challenge for me was time stretching. I wanted to be really competitive on the audio market on iOS. I developed my own algorithms from the scratch. It was breaking my brain how to make it, maybe 2 or 3 months. It was the hardest thing. One main thing that I'm most satisfied in GR2 is that it's much better than GR16. I wanted it to be the next level for GR16, and GR2 is like a million times better in every aspect than GR16. All the apps I'm reading, I'm often used by myself in my music. But I couldn't use GR16 more than just written some pattern, some short pattern. And now in GR2 I can write a whole track, the full-length track, and it sounds pretty good with a good quality, like comparable if I do it in Ableton, for example.
Now, I want to show you the part parameters, which is something that every part has. We get to the part parameters by pressing here, and here you have some basic settings, including some very powerful features. Now, apart from being able to set up some basic stuff like default note and velocity and some other things, we also have an arpeggiator, which is great. Not only does it give you the bread and butter stuff of up and down movement plus random and other things, it also has Groovebox style patterns in here, and I love that. Next to the arpeggiator, we have a very powerful tool. It's called Groove, and it deals with timing of notes and also velocities. And inside here, there are different instrument types that you can choose, and they basically have sets for note timings and velocities. So you select something, and then you simply just dial in with these knobs how much you want of those things. And if you need it, you got a third knob that adds some random velocities in there. Very nice. Now there's something more extremely awesome in here, but first, the part color. Do I really need to tell you what it does? Ha! Alright, so listen up. Parameter sets might sound like a boring thing, but it is actually ridiculously powerful. However, before you start using it, there is a caveat. You cannot use parameter sets with AUE3s. No, this was made to be used with the internal Grooverider 2 stuff. But what does it actually do? Well, when you're saving a parameter set, you're saving down states for parameters inside a part. And as you can see in this list that I've compiled, there is a lot that can be saved. Now, you can save it all down as a parameter set. But why would you want to do that? Well, it turns out that these parameter sets can actually be attached to specific clips when you're making them. So when you're switching from one clip to another, you can have a part completely change in sound and how it works. Yeah, like I said, it's super powerful, but you have to use the internal Grooverider 2 stuff. Now, when you've sat down and worked with something for a long time, you might want to save it. And here you get to save both parts presets and layer presets. But it is extremely important that you select to save the right thing. Because you see, saving a layer preset only saves what's inside of this window here, meaning the parameters for whatever instrument that you've loaded. So it doesn't save all the effects, the equalizer, and everything else that you've done. If you want to save everything inside a part, you need to save a parts preset. And so we long press on part, select save, we get prompted, fill in a name, save it, and then we can find that if we go to the internal browser, user, and then in this case, part preset, and there you have it. Now, when it comes to layers, if you want to layer them up across parts, it's good to save a layer preset instead. But if you just want to layer up several of them to do like a really fat synth patch, you can just use copy and paste commands instead. Now, one thing I do want to highlight is the IFX or the insert effects. All of these are internal GR2 effects, and you cannot have any AUE3s in here at this point. I'm not sure if that's going to be added in later, but there is a bunch of already great sounding effects in here from Jim, and you always have the send effects that you can use if you want to load external effects. But yeah, most of these effects in here are really well sounding effects, plus they are so optimized, so they take very little to run, and you can have up to 3 of them. Also, these effects are kind of at the output for all of the layers, so it's not like all of the layers have 3 effects each. No, they all have these 3. And if you press up here, you can actually reroute how the layers are going through the effects. All of that stuff we just went through is super fun, but only if you have instruments loaded. Well, you can load instruments through the layer button. You just simply long press here to get the list, and then you can select whatever you want to load. Now, I was curious to find out why Jim is a programmer today, why he's developing at all, and how he got started. And this is what he said.
When I was 11, my father bought me a computer, ZX Spectrum, 48 kilobytes of RAM. I started reading my first programs on BASIC there. I wanted to write my own games on the Spectrum, and I actually did some games. I was then studied assembler, started to make some easy games, some very simple games. And later on, when my father bought me an IBM PC with 486 processor, the X2, it had 66 megahertz. It was a very high speed at the time, and it was in 1993. And I started to learn the IBM PC assembler. Then I was started in Pascal and finally in C++. It was interesting for me.
So how did all of that lead up to where we are today? I mean, why are you making iOS apps?
I always wanted to combine 2 things in my life. One thing is programming, and the other thing is music. They were kind of incompatible. One thing can bring you some money, but then you do music and it doesn't give you much profit. And I decided to combine them, and I don't know, it was not intentional, just the circumstances. I decided to try audio plugin development in 2016 when I started to write Poison.
So here we have an instance of the main synthesizer inside GR2, and we're going to start by looking at the oscillator, where we have some quick controls. Those are pitch, glide, and then 2 edit knobs. And what those edit knobs do will actually change depending on what mode you're selecting for the oscillator. In here we have 2 oscillators that we can blend between with the mix knob, and if we look at the waveform selection, we can see that they have all the bread and butter stuff with Super Saw on top, and oscillator 1 also provides you with a bunch of different noise. Now, the way that the pitch works in here is that you can change the main pitch with this knob over here for both oscillators, but then you can also offset the pitch for oscillator 2 with this knob over here. Now, there are actually some more ways of changing the pitch, but those are tied to 3 of the options for the different modes in here. And the modes is what makes the synthesizer so powerful. Quick pause. If I sound a little bit weird in the next section in this video, it's because I haven't fully recovered from being sick a second time during this project. Now, it's been over a week and I can't really wait for my voice to fully recover, but hopefully you can understand me anyway. Alright, so we get to the different modes. Right now it's in off mode, and in this one it's just generating whatever waveform you've selected, and then you can mix between them. You can also offset oscillator 2 in pitch with this knob, plus you can also do it with this edit knob. And if you do select one of the noises, you also get a noise filter control on edit 1. The next mode is the hard sync mode, and in this one, oscillator 2's frequency and phase is synchronized to the frequency of oscillator 1. You can control pitch of oscillator 2, mix, and detune. The XFM mode is my most favorite mode because this is basically FM synthesis. And in this mode, oscillator 1 is cross-modulated by oscillator 2. You can control the oscillator 2 pitch, the mix between the oscillators, and also the depth of cross-modulation. By the way, all of this sounds way better when you start modulating the cross FM depth. And yes, you can modulate stuff in here. It's a little bit limited. I'll show you in a little bit. Let me just go through the other modes. So next up is ring, which is ring modulation, and in this one, it basically just multiplies both of the outputs from the oscillators. Now the boost mode is lovely because it adds a soft clipping saturator on top of the waveforms. And as I tweak this up, you can see my sawtooth waveforms turning squarish. And as a synth nerd, I absolutely love it when developers are thinking out simple ways of adding more synthesis methods to their synthesizers. Now the next mode is pulse width / phase, and here both oscillators will have the same waveform. You select here and it gets duplicated over here. Now when you do select square or pulse as it's called, then you also get to control the pulse width. But if you select any other waveform, you can offset the phase. And in the last one, which is again pulse width plus sync, so it's a hard sync mode on top of pulse width. Well, oscillator 2 will always have a pulse waveform selected so that you can mess with the pulse width for it, and then it hard syncs to oscillator 1, and with this you can create some insane sounds. Now, as you can see, Jim has worked really hard on adding as much synthesis as he can in here, while also tying them down to very few controls. So there's a lot you can do with just a few tweaks here and there and get so many different sounds out of this thing. Well, even though that's the case, Jim still added 300 presets for setting up just this window. I'm not talking about all of these controls, I'm talking about the ones that are in here. So if you don't want to tweak any knobs, you can just scroll through this list and choose whatever you want. We're gonna have a look at the filter section next, and I'm just gonna open up this view here on this edit button so we can see all the filter types and modes. Now the quick controls gives us access to tweaking the cutoff and resonance, and then on top of that we have a bipolar envelope knob, which makes it so that you can use the envelope for controlling the filter, and then we also have keyboard tracking. Now, if we move over to the filter view, we've got 5 different filter modes, which is low pass, band pass, high pass, peak, and also notch. And then depending on what filter mode you're selecting, you have the options between 6, 12, and 24 decibel per octave slopes. On top of that, you have a soft clipping for the cue point, and when you're playing and tweaking around, you have a spectrum view of your sound, and you can see what the filter actually does to your sound. Now lastly, you have a filter bypass control up here. Next up, we're gonna have a look at the envelope, and we're gonna open this up so we can see the envelope, and I'm gonna drag some stuff around. Now, the quick controls give you access to controlling attack, decay, sustain, and release. And if we go into the window, we can also curve 3 of the stages: the attack stage, the decay stage, and the release stage. And I'm a big fan of being able to really curve my envelopes. Now in here we also have 2 more synth controls, because here we can actually send the ADSR to control either the pitch or edit knob 1. And so if we select it to control the edit knob 1 and we go back to the oscillator view here, and let's say that we select the XFM mode, well, the edit 1 will be controlling the depth of cross modulation. And as we're modulating it with the envelope, we're now able to make more classically sounding FM type sounds, even though we only really have 1 operator here. Now the last most important thing to talk about is how to control amplitude, because the envelope has 3 modes for this. If we look at the top row here, right now we've got ADSR to amp selected. Basically, the attack, decay, sustain, release will control the overall volume for your patch 2. Now in the release to amp, only the release stage will control the volume for your patch. And in the off mode, you will have no control from the envelope at all on your volume. So your sound will be as loud as you've set it with the mix knob down here. Now, in all 3 modes, however, the full envelope can still be used to modulate the pitch, the edit 1 knob, and also the filter. The last section is the LFO, and I'm just going to press on this to show you the entire window, and there is a lot of stuff you can control in here. Now, the quick controls give you control over LFO depth and also overall speed, and then we have all of this. The first thing I want to show you, the shape you're seeing now, if I touch this plus here in the middle and drag it back and forth, I can skew the waveform. I can also drag it up and down, and I can curve its shape. And then we have these sides here where we can drag up to basically turning the depth up. And then we can also touch this thing here, which allows us to offset the phase. You also have an EG, which is an envelope generator, and then you have a random one. Now, check this out. If we pull up on quantize, it basically turns into bits, and the modulation signal will actually move like this. This can be done with all of the waveforms. And if we look at the top here, we can see that we now also have a control for switching from bipolar to unipolar to half wave. And not only that, we can invert our waveform, we can sync to BPM, and we can re-trigger it with the keyboard. And then when we go down to the bottom row, we can send this modulation to the oscillator pitch, filter cutoff, to the amp. We can modulate edit 1, the panning, and the IFX knobs. Alright, so we've gone through all of the features in the main synth, but there is one more page I really need to show you because you can do microtonal stuff in here. If we go to the oscillator edit page and we press right here where the cogwheel menu is, we can see that we have a micro scale tuning. And this will allow you to change all the notes in cents, and you have up to 100 cents per note. And something I always do is I go in here and I'll change all of them up and down ever so slightly because it gives more life to the patch. And especially if you're into synthwave type of music, you can just do some micro tuning for all of your notes. And so when you're playing chords, everything will be just a little bit off and it just sounds so yummy. Now, on top of that, we also have controls for polyphony, scale tuning, and we can also use the keyboard velocity for controlling either the filter or the amp. We have now gone through all of the settings and features for the main synthesizer. And when it comes to the wavetable synthesizer, they're all the same. All of these pages, filter, envelope, LFO, even the settings here are the same. However, the oscillator section is different. The quick controls are still pitch, glide, edit 1, edit 2 knobs. However, when we go into the edit view here, we can see that we have this big wavetable view, a button for loading wavetables, and then we've got the two knobs, which are edit 1 and edit 2, and here they're basically just wave position and warp for the wavetables. Now the nice thing here though is that whether you are modulating the wavetable edit knob with either the envelope or the LFO, as you know, you can only send it to edit 1. Well, in this case, with the wavetable synthesizer, you can actually flip it and modulate the warp instead of the wavetable position. I've mentioned it before, but this thing also loads Serum wavetables. You can find multiple of them online for free, download them, put them inside the wavetable folder, inside the GR2 folder, in the Files app, and then you can open up the browser and load them from there, or you can just press the load button here. Now, Jim has 4 apps on the App Store, and 3 of them are Groovebox style apps. Apparently, the guy is really in love with making music the Groovebox style way. It's a very specific workflow, and I'm wondering how he got there. So I asked questions about what he had used previously, in the forms of software and hardware, and we got to talking trackers.
Many years ago, when I was a teenager, in the middle of the 90s, I was working with trackers. There was such programs like Scream Tracker, Fast Tracker, Impulse Tracker. So it was only 4 channels. They were working only with samples. There were some very cheap synths like on board on the Sound Blaster. So when I was 17, I started to dream about that somehow I need to invent my own sequencer. At that time, there were not any good sequences on the market. It was only starting. It's 1997, 1996. And I was thinking about, hey, can I create my own sequencer for MS-DOS? In MS-DOS, which will be able to play samples and also synthesize the sounds. It was my dream, and finally it came true.
Now, about an hour into our conversation, we decided to take a break just to get some refreshments. And when we came back a few minutes later, I dialed him up. I noticed that his room sounded different. And the reason to why I care about that stuff is because I have to process the audio in post, to make it sound as good as possible for the audience, for you guys. But in this case, it wasn't really a problem. However, I was still curious, so I asked him.
I'm in Kiev, so almost every night we have to hear these alerts, and drones are flying over the city and bombing the city. So I'm right now from the shelter in my corridor room.
Yeah, that answer dropped down like a hammer on my head because I was having such a great time talking to Jim, through this whole discussion, and I completely forgot where he was and where he had been during the entire development cycle of GR2. So I took a few seconds to compose myself and then asked him, "Are you okay? Do you want to continue?"
I'm good, yes, because it's kind of, I get used to it, so it's maybe 3 years happening here. So let's continue to do our job.
Back to work, he says. All right, so considering the previous answer Jim gave me about trackers and stuff, I started to realize why he was into the Groovebox way of making music. And finally, I just asked him, have you ever owned a Groovebox? And this is what he said.
Yeah, I purchased Korg Electribe 2, and I tried to make my tracks in it, and that I quickly realized that I want to make my app like this, and I want to make my music on my app. So it's not like a sequencer, it's not like a DAW. Walking in a DAW, sometimes it can feel very boring when you have too much of everything on the screen, and it kind of takes away your creativity. And from the other side, when you use Grooveboxes, it's very different workflow. You do everything not like you've done it before. It changes your sound drastically.
I'm going to press on the edit button to open up the sampler window, and right now it is empty, and we can begin by loading a sample by pressing load. However, when you're doing this, you're only accessing the user folder. So if you want to reach the factory content, then you actually have to open up the GR2 internal browser instead. Now, the thing I want to highlight first is the sample editor, and to get there, we just press the edit button. And here we can see our sample in a big view. We have these markers we can move around, and then we have a bunch of tools like fading, reverse, gain, normalize, mid-side conversion, and we can also do some cutting, copying, pasting, and trimming. And if we do anything wrong, like trimming here, we can just press undo and we're good to go. And it's also possible to record samples directly into this window. Now, once you're done recording, cutting, editing, whatever sample you have in here, you can just save it and then use that sample in any other project because it will end up in the user folder. Once you're done, you can exit the sample editor by pressing up here. Now, while we're in this view, I want to show you how to zoom in and out of a sample. You just simply press your finger onto the screen and hold it, and you drag down to zoom in. You drag up to zoom out, and while you've got it zoomed in, you can drag sideways to scroll through the sample. Now you can adjust the start and end point of your sample with these two knobs down here that are now edit 1 and edit 2. And only edit 1 is modulatable, but it will move the entire window around when you're doing that. So if you got a short length, you can get some scanner action going as you're modulating it with either the envelope or the LFO. And here is another cool thing because we can just flip this over and turn E1 and E2 into two effect knobs instead. The decimator knob is basically a bit crusher effect, and the boost is like an overdrive. Oh, and by the way, there is a non-destructive reverse sample function here. The next thing I want to highlight are the looping modes, especially for those of you who are into making beat-perfect loops. You see, it's very important that you choose the right loop mode because the regular loop mode is not classical, as Jim puts it, because it actually does a crossfade between the end and start point of the loop. So for beat perfect loops, you have to choose one of these three because they do not crossfade the start and end of the sample. Other than that, we of course have the no loop, and then we got ping pong where it just plays back and forth over the sample. Then you got one shot, and my most favorite one, which is pass through. The reason I like the pass-through so much is because it ignores the end position of a slice when you're triggering a slice and holding it, making it so that you can juggle beats. Now, one of the things that Jim mentioned being really happy with was the time stretching algorithm, because he basically built it from scratch and he put a lot of time into it. And it does sound really, really good. And in Grooverider 2, it's called Sample Warp. If we press on here, we can see what mode is loaded for the sample warp. Now, the beat slice mode will slice the sample up into smaller slices, and then it will just time stretch each slice to fit the pattern tempo. Now, to get all of this slicing and the stretching to play nice with the rhythm, we have this snap button here, which basically makes it so it's easier to get closer to the transient points. And then we also have beat stretch, and it will just prolong every slice. Let me also add that even though this mode is called beat slice, this should not be mixed up with the actual slicer that is also in here, but more about that one later on. Now, the third warping mode isn't really doing time stretching. In fact, it's not doing that at all. It just simply pitches the entire sample so it matches the pattern tempo. Now, the third and final warp mode is texture, which works more like a classical time stretch algorithm. And this is my most favorite one. It's not really granular synthesis, but it's close enough when you mess around with this. And so, yeah, I really love it. Next, we're gonna look at the sample slices, and this is different from the beat slice inside the warp menu. Now, the sample slices allow you to slice up a sample into 16 slices, and then you can separately for each slice set up the start and length point, and then you can also set up the pitch for each individual slice. Quick side note here, Jim just put out an update for Grooverider 2 and it adds launchpad support, which is super dope. But he also changed the look of the knobs, so the knobs will look like this now for the remainder of the video. Now, I have put the sampler and the drum rack in the same section in this video, but they are actually different instruments, and Grooverider actually makes a distinction between them. The sampler is a melodic type instrument and the drum kit is a drum type instrument. And the importance of this really is just that when you are setting up a part, it will optimize the part for you to work with whatever type of instrument you're actually loading. So if you're loading a melodic one, it will just set the keyboard and everything else up in here for you to be able to quickly work in a melodical way. While with the drum one, it will set it up like a drum thing for you. Now, with all of that said, these two instruments still belong in the same section in this video because they are the same. The drum rack has everything that the sampler does, only times 16, because there's 16 slots for drum sounds. Well, there is one missing feature. The slices mode, this one that you can find in the sampler, you won't find that in the drum rack. But that's about it, because when it comes to everything else, core synth elements like filter, envelope, LFO, and all other synth settings can also be found inside the sampler and drum rack instruments. And so yeah, when you load a drum rack, you can think of it as a sampler times 16. So you got 16 drum voices. lastly, for all you synth heads just like me, if you'd rather work with synthesized drums instead of sample drums, you can. All you have to do is to switch out the sample layers for synth layers. You see, we press right here where it says sampler, and we get a list of all of the internal sound generators inside GR2. There is no limit to this. You can really mix up all of your drum rack layers any way you want, and once you're done, you can save it down as a preset like I have. However, you don't have to build yours from the scratch. You can start from the existing ones from within the factory bank folder. These two are synth drum racks. So we've established a few things with Jim's background here. He got a computer early on and could start coding and learning about coding, and then he just kept going. He's also very much into Grooveboxes because he comes from a background of trackers and other types of more limited platforms that aren't fully fledged digital audio workstations. But there's more behind this choice of this very specific type of musical device. And once you hear about Jim's musical background, it all starts making sense.
I love the club music of the 90s, techno house music, and the prodigy, electronic music, breakbeat music. I was kind of fan of all these things. I was working a DJ for maybe about 5 or 6 years in a nightclub. I was playing house and techno, so it's a very big part of my background. That's why I understand what features my app have to build this original sound of the 90s with the samplers, with the drums and steps, I don't know.
Crazy.
First time when I heard the Prodigy, it was maybe in 1997. It really blew my mind. The first tracks I heard was Firestar, then I heard Out of Space, No Good, and I thought I want to write this kind of music. I instantly understood how they working with samples. It was incredible how they sliced everything or samples from the old records. I understood that it's a kind of hip-hop culture when you take samples from different sources, combine them, but I don't know, the way how they do it was totally insane for me, so I immediately got into the scene and I became a fan of the Prodigy.
I was a fan, he says, but it actually goes much deeper than that. You see, if we head on over to Jim's YouTube channel, we'll be able to find some Prodigy track breakdowns. These are very good. If you've never watched these, you really should. It's kind of mind-blowing, and I did of course ask him about this.
Most of the samples was already known for the people because some of them were already described on the cover to the album, but there are different communities that started to search for the samples that was not registered, but they try to find them, and I was in those forums, and then I found that people already have so many samples from the tracks, and the one track that I thought that I can recreate fully is Mama Bicha, but there are lead parts I had to synthesize myself. All the drums I synthesized myself because it is still a mystery what Liam Howlett did use for this Mama Bicha. It's a mystery.
Now, when you're recording notes and automation in Grooverider 2, you're always recording it into clips. However, the workflow is completely different depending on which one of these two pages you're choosing to work from. You see, the clips page is like a clip launcher. So when you're playing a clip with MIDI notes and automation in it, it just keeps looping until you either stop it or select another clip, or you use one of the modifiers that are available in here that do some pretty cool stuff. Now, if you're working from the song page, you are working with a linear song arranger, a place where you actually go to build tracks. Basically, you're not limited by a looping workflow, and when it comes to automation, you have even more options in the song arranger because there are specific tracks for actually recording automation for the FX page and stuff you might have loaded into there. Now, what's important here is really that the clips page and the song arranger page are completely independent. You cannot use both of them at the same time. I gotta say though that the most natural way of working with music inside GR2 is by starting out in the clips page, and you jam around in there, and when you feel like you have enough and you want to start building a song, you just copy whatever you've already made in the clips page and paste it into the songs page. And here you get to move your stuff around. You can even take clips from one part to another part. And you can also record notes in between all of the stuff you paste in. So yeah, it's a great way of working. Now you can also work the other way around, where you start out by recording in the song page and then copy and paste into the clip page. And you want to do that if you want to work with longer or really long clips, especially if you're into ambient music or atmospheric music. Now the reason for this is because of how GR2 actually handles clip length. I'll show you by just starting out recording some notes into the clips page. All we have to do is to make a new clip by double tapping here, making sure it's selected, press record and play, and then do our thing on the keyboard. Now on top of that, we can also add some automation while we're recording by just dragging stuff around. So we go in here, drag a few knobs, and that is now recorded. One thing to highlight here is that we ended up with a very short loop. And the length of that loop is set up by default in the pattern manager up here. And in here we can see that the length has been set to 1 bar, which is very, very short. And if we adjust this upward, we can get a maximum of 16 bars. But this is a false limit because clips can be way longer, but you have to set that up yourself by adjusting that length in the edit page. And to get there, you just highlight a clip and then press edit, or you just double tap on a clip. And this works in both the clips page and the song page. Now in this edit view, we can see all of the notes that we've recorded, and here we can edit them, drag them around and do a bunch of stuff. And then we can also see automation that we've recorded. We go up here where we have the A, press it, and we can see all of the knobs, and we can select one of them and just go in here and fine adjust it or delete it if we want to. And there is one more thing we can do. If you manually want to adjust the length of your clip, you use this thing here and you drag it to wherever you want or whatever length you want. And as you can see, the clip length can be very, very long. Now, the nice thing here is that if you want more of an open canvas type of workflow, you just work from the song page instead, because you don't have to set anything up. You press record and play, and you can record for as long as you want. And that includes notes and automation. And what's even doper here is that when you've recorded a really, really long clip, you can actually copy it and put it into the clip page and have that as a loop. I want to show you more ways of actually inputting notes into clips. Right now I'm using a classical type keyboard, and I just have to press this button once and we got a pad style keyboard. Now on top of that, when you're working with a melodical part, then you also have a chord type keyboard. And the types of chords in here and also their scales is something you set up in the pattern parameters in the pattern browser. Now, if you're recording notes into a drum part, then the chord keyboard will be switched out for a drum keyboard. If those keyboards aren't enough for you and you have a MIDI keyboard that you love working with, well, all you have to do is to connect it to Grooverider 2 and then use that instead to record your notes. Alright, so that's how you live record notes into GR2, but what about programming it, manually? Well, there is a fun little mode in here called steps, and when we activate it, this interface down here becomes a step sequencer. So when we're activating buttons in here, we're activating steps in our sequences. Now, when you're doing this with a melodic part, you can select what keys are being inputted for these steps by holding down here and dragging it up and down. And if we're doing this while we're activating steps, we can do melodic sequences. Now, it works exactly the same way if you're doing this with a drum part, only you're not sliding through keys, you're sliding through instruments. Now, the last way of inputting notes is by tapping in notes. Now, when you're working from within this view, you want to familiarize yourself with these tools up here. You use the pen tool for adding notes into the piano roll, and you can tap in notes like this, and you can also tap and hold and drag to make longer notes. To erase notes, you simply tap on the notes. If you want to move notes around, then you use the selection tool. If you want to erase multiple notes, you use the eraser tool. And if you don't want to erase notes and just mute them, you use the muting tool. If you want to copy and paste your notes, you simply do a selection of the notes you want to copy, and then you go into this menu over here where you can find the paste option along with some other really useful options like half timing or double timing whatever you recorded. Now this interface is also made for touch, and we can see that if we grab a note here, we can move the note back and forth with this control, we can make it longer or shorter with this one, we can move it up and down in pitch with this one, and there is an extra control up here that I really like, because with it we can set probability. So if we select these notes and drag it down here so we have the probability being 40%, well, we end up with a sequence where these notes have a 40% chance of playing or not. I'm about to round off this section, but I really need to jump back to something I mentioned earlier, and that is modifiers for clips inside the clip page. You can access those modifiers if you activate the cogwheel button over here, and now the view of these clips changes. And when we press in the lower right corner, we get this menu. Now these modifiers will only take action after an X amount of loops have been played of the clip, and you can set that up yourself. And the modifier I want to highlight here is the random clip one, because if you add that to all of the clips in a part lane, then you can get a generative random sequence playing, which is really fun, and is how I made this thing here. It's basically a self-playing pattern. Now I said it will activate the modifier after it's played an X amount of loops, and you set that up here where you can see right now it says X1. Well, we can press and hold here and drag it up and change that number. And so if we set it to something like 8, we can get it to loop 8 times before it executes the random clip selection. And that's basically how you set up modifiers for clips. Did you know that Poison 202 also is available on macOS? Well, the reason for that is because of the Prodigy. Check this out.
It was in 2017. Before that time, it was very hard to contact the Prodigy because they were very popular, they were close to people, so very small amount of people had their direct contacts. They were not doing interviews at the time. After I released Poison 202 synthesizer in 2016, which was heavily inspired on the Prodigy samples and the Prodigy kind of patches. Yeah, maybe in the end of 2016, Liam wrote me an email. It was like, I couldn't believe it. I think that somebody is tricking me. Then I asked the next day the people who knows him, and they confirmed, yes, it's his email. He liked my Poison 202 and he wanted to use it for his compositions. And then we, on this background, we started to communicate. I said, no, it's only iOS compatible. Do you have iPad or something, iPhone, iPad? He said, no, it's not kind of devices I use, so I need it on the MacBook. So I decided that for him I can convert all the stuff to the Mac. It took maybe additional couple of months to translate it. And also I started to sell it separately from the iOS version.
Now I am a The Prodigy fan myself. I have all of their music and they changed the way I think about making music and the techniques I use for making music, just like with Jim. And I am so jealous of Jim for what comes next.
I can't describe it. When they were playing a concert in Kiev in 2017 on the big festival with 10,000 people, and Liam just told me, come on the backstage, come on with us, and you just stay on the side and you watch all the concert from the backstage. I couldn't believe that it's happening. It was a very important moment for me in my life. I was really happy. I was a fan of the Prodigy for so many years and they contacted me first.
Now all of the 16 parts have a 3-band equalizer. It's located right here, and if we press the edit button, we can see all of the controls. And we can also see that it's got 2 modes. Here we can freely adjust the frequency band, we've got a control for the cue point, and we have a range of 15 decibels that we can either boost or cut with. But we cannot cut stuff off completely. Now, if we switch over to the X band, we now have 2 frequency splits. We got a 9 decibel boost range and also the ability to completely cut an entire band off. Oh, and these controls are available in the mixer if you drop down the keyboard. Okay, so next up we're gonna have a look at the internal effects. There are 3 slots for every part, and there is a long list of effects to choose from. Now some of these might look like they're the same thing, like the 8 phasers, the 3 compressors, but in the end, they're not the same, and their naming schemes tells that story. They all have these preset values in them that make each plugin both work and sound different. And the upside to a system like this is that, well, if we load a plugin, we can see that there are very few controls, which makes the plugin way more immediate and easier to tweak. There's not a lot to think about. And that is one of the core aspects that Jim has been focusing on while making GR2. A good Groovebox prioritizes immediacy, and this is a red thread we can see throughout GR2. I mean, you can even bring up the master effects control right here if you want to jam with live effects as you're producing. Plus, there is this really neat function for the IFX, send effects, and also master bus effects. You see, when you've got plugins loaded, you can press this button and you now have a touchpad instead. Yeah, this is DJ Think and I love it. Now there is one bit of weirdness here to highlight, and that is the fact that there is no reverb in the list for the IFX when you're inside a melodic part. In any case, if we go to a part with a drum rack loaded and open up the IFX, then the reverb is right there. Now, I have some experience working with developers and doing app development, so I can kind of guess why there is no reverb here. However, I didn't want to guess, so I asked Jim and he sent me an answer. And of course, he mentions the fact that reverbs are CPU intensive. They take a lot of resources to run. And then he also says that it's a bad practice putting reverbs on inserts. And I agree with him if I put on my producer hat, but if I put on my sound designer hat, I completely disagree with him. But he also mentions some limitations, like the fact that you can only have 4 drum rack parts per pattern, which makes sense because 4 drum racks with 16 layers makes 64 layers in a pattern. And that's on top of everything else, and if you would add reverbs and stuff, yeah, I can see how it would quickly become really heavy for the processor to run all of that, especially on older devices. So yeah, some limitations kind of had to be there. Now, if you're into reverbs, then this is not the only reverb in GR2. No, because if we go to the FX Send buses and open up the list, we can see all of the same effects that we found in the IFX section, plus a whole reverb section, including a shimmer reverb. Now, another thing I want to highlight is how the sidechain modules are working. There is one for compression and one for gating. Now, you can use these two plugins in the iFX, in the Send effects, and even on the master bus. And the way that you set it up is by loading them and then going down to this box and tapping it and then choosing which part it should listen to for the sidechaining. Now, the master effects are special because they're catering towards a live performance usage of these plugins. So instead of knobs, we have touchpads. And if we look at the list, we can see that we pretty much have the same type of effects in here that we have in the IFX and Send. However, there is an emphasis on BPM versions of some of these effects because tempo syncing is really important when you're doing live performance stuff.
Bruh. Bruh, 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 bruh.
Next up, we have our master bus, which can hold 3 effects. And in here, we find all of the same effects minus a reverb. However, we do have a maximizer added to the list. And finally, there's of course the limiter that is on the 2 bus here. You can either turn it on or off. Now, it doesn't quite end there because there are routing options to consider also when you're setting up your projects. If we go to the sound page and we go here and press this button, we get to the routing for all the effects. And if we look at the top here, we can see that right now this layer is outputting to IFX1. But if I instead just press IFX2 here, it's gonna bypass IFX1 and go straight to IFX2. Now, this is also all dependent on what you've got down here in the part IFX routing. Right now, all of these effects are running in series, meaning the sound is entering at the top here, going through 1, 2, 3, and then to the output. But we can easily make these effects into individual effects by choosing parallel. Well, we've also got 2 interesting mixed modes here, and I want to show you a user case for this one. Number 1 is running by itself and then going to output. And then in parallel, we have 2 going into 3 and then to the output. You see, I'll use this scenario for when I want to distort my bass kick and my snare, but with different distortion modules. Plus, I also want a reverb on my snare. So the kick goes to 1 with 1 distortion plugin, and the snare goes to the second with a different distortion module and a reverb at the end. Lastly, there is a way of actually sending LFO modulation to the IFX section, but you only get to modulate 1 knob at a time. If we look here, we can see that we have an LFO IFX knob and we can pull that up, but nothing happens on the knobs on the effects unless you also pull these ones up, and there's 1 for every effect. Now, one thing to highlight here is that it is a guessing game to know exactly which one of the knobs will move in an effect, and it actually differs. So it's not the same knob in two different delay effects. And I was looking for one where I could modulate the time domain, and it turns out only this one does it. Yeah, so you're gonna have to try that out for yourself, but it's fun exploring. Now the routing doesn't stop there, because if we go to the FX bus page, we can see that we have routing options for FX A and B send return channels. Here we can send the FX change directly to the master bus or to individual instances of the MFX. And again, the sound and the way it takes through these plugins before it goes to the master route is all dependent on the routing that we have for the MFX. If we check those, we can see we've got that parallel one, the series one, the two types of mixed, and then we have two special ones. And what I think is really nice here is that Jim has added a graphical overlay that actually shows you the route of the audio. Lastly, I want to remind you that even though we don't have any modulation for the master effects or the FX-A or B send return channels, we do get to automate them. And you do that in the song mode. Now, you won't see anything pop up when you're recording in automation here, and it's as easy as just pressing record and play and just move some knobs around. So as you can see, there's nothing in these lanes, but what you will see is an A popping up on a channel when it has automation. And if we select that and we go up here, we can then see all the automations that we've recorded. We can select one and edit it, and we can even draw in stuff here by hand. So, do I have any negative criticism? Well, I do. However, remember that you're watching this video in the future, and any criticisms I might have, well, they might have already been addressed, which is why you should always check the version history for an app on the App Store. Here you can see if developers have added new features, fixed things, or maybe removed something even. Yeah. In any case, I hate the fact that I can't get access to my saved pattern, part, and or layer files. You only have these three folders in the Files app, and I want access to all of them. Now, I do want to add that I did send off a question about this limitation to Jim, and he did answer me. And as you can see, the internal working structure of Grooverider 2 doesn't really allow for this type of file sharing. So this is something he's gonna have to solve if he ever does. I know from experience working with developers how hard it can be to fix something when you didn't plan for it from the beginning. But I hope it fixes it, because I want to be able to back them up. And I've been working on preset packs that I want to put up on my store. Plus, users might just want to share their projects with one another. So access to all of the saved files that you're making inside GR2 would be great. Now, I also find it a little bit annoying that you can't use AUV3 effect plugins inside the insert effect slots. Now, you can use them in FX-A and B send return, and you can also use them in the master effect bus. Then again, this limitation does make sense here. We are not working with a DAW. Grooverider 2 is a standalone Groovebox that has been optimized for doing Groovebox's stuff. However, I wanted to be thorough, so I did send off a question to Jim about this so he could explain it to you. And of course, he pushes on the fact that he optimized Grooverider 2 to work really well with all of the internal stuff. And the internal stuff is what I've been focusing on in this video, because the internal stuff is what makes up Grooverider 2, not the external AUV3s. I haven't even dived into the fact that Poison 202 and Pure Acid now also exists as these more optimized versions of those apps that you can load if you already own them. And that's simply because even though they are Jim's apps, they are external apps. They're not what makes Grooverider 2 Grooverider 2. Now, the synthesis nerd in me is really annoyed over the fact that I only get to modulate one of these edit knobs at a time, and even with the effect knobs, I would love to modulate more things. But on the other hand, I do keep forgetting that I can record automation for stuff also. But yeah, I really do wish sometimes that I could modulate both Edit 1 and Edit 2 at the same time. Now, even though I don't find 16 parts, or you could view it as 16 tracks, a limiting thing for a Groovebox, some people might do, which is why I bring it up. So it's not a bit of criticism that I subscribe to, but I know that a lot of people in the audience might actually do that. So what's funny is that I'm starting to dig up potential critiques other people might have, meaning not my own, because I don't have that much to complain about. And I just absolutely love Grooverider 2. Now, with all of that said, there is still one bit of criticism, one bit of contention I know that some others will actually have and needs to be talked about, and that is the fact that there are no audio tracks in Grooverider 2. To me, it's not a real problem because I can work around it, because even though GR2 has been inspired by 90s era style grooveboxes, it doesn't come with the same limitations of those. It's not like you only have 8 or 16 seconds of sampling memory. No, you can load samples that are up to 5 minutes long into this thing. So if you needed to load entire rap verses and stuff like that, you can actually do that. And you can record them yourself into the sampler as you're working. Look, grooveboxes are weird animals, and they're not for everybody. They're not digital audio workstations. No, grooveboxes are standalone devices catering towards immediacy and also live performances. You mostly work with MIDI. You have a load of instruments, but you're usually limited in the amount of tracks that you have to work with. And up till a few years ago, grooveboxes used to come without audio tracks. I know there are modern machines today, both software and hardware, that does include audio tracks. However, whenever audio tracks are implemented in a Groovebox environment, those functions feel extremely bare bones and limited, at least to me. And this is why, if you are into working a lot with audio tracks and you want it to feel like you're in a natural environment to do that, well then I heavily recommend that you go for an arranger type DAW. But sometimes it's just like Jim says, it feels like you've got too much on the screen when you're using a fully fledged DAW. He uses Ableton on desktop, and sometimes he just wants something smaller, more compact, like a Groovebox or a beat-making machine, which is why he built Grooverider the way he did. You've got great internal synthesis here through the main synth. You have support for AUV3 if that's not enough for you. The core sampler is great and is being used for both melodic and drumming material. You can record, edit, and mangle samples on the fly. Also, there's two different workflows for your projects. You got the clips page and the song page. You can start in one, end up in another, or combine them. And when you've got something going and you just want to jam with it, then there's functions in here that are just great for live performances. Now, even though this is a longer, more full video, I still haven't been able to talk about everything inside GR2, and one of the things that I skipped over was the global menu, where you can find settings for selecting USB MIDI controllers and also selecting a different visual style for the keyboard. Plus, it's in here that you find export options if you want to export all of your stuff as stems to be used in some other type of DAW somewhere. To round this off, I'm gonna say, go buy GR2. You'll be getting a lot of bang for your buck. And if you have GR16, it will be an upgrade. If you've never used Grooveboxes before, it will be a new experience. If you already have Grooveboxes, now you have another one. Yeah, simply just go and buy it. And I also want to say thank you so much, Jim, for doing the interview with me twice. patrons already know the full story, and over at our Discord, people know bits and pieces of the story. And you should join our Discord. Yeah, you can find a link to Groovewriter 2 on the App Store and also a Discord invite link down in the pinned comment under this video and also, of course, in the description. I also want to give a massive shout out and a massive thank you to all of the patrons who have decided to stay even though my output has been so slow. There are many reasons for that, but I'm not a life vlogger and I don't like complaining about live stuff in my videos. I want to focus on, hardware and apps and things like that, just musical things and tools and devices. That's why I don't talk about it, but it might sometimes look as if I'm gone from YouTube, but I'm not. I've been here for 11 years soon, and I'm gonna keep on being here for as long as you'll have me. Yeah, so thank you everybody for all of your support. And as usual, I wish you a very productive week. Now go finger all of your stuff and have a lot of fun doing it.
Mm.